I moved into my new place in late October, right when the air started to turn crisp and the days grew shorter. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After the divorce, I needed a change. Somewhere quiet where I could keep to myself, lick my wounds, and figure out what the hell was next. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet, suburban, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business. There was something off about the house next door. The first time I saw him, Mr. Wright Carter, he was standing in his yard, staring at nothing in particular. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a stooped back and a head full of thinning gray hair. He didn't say a word, just stared blankly as I moved my boxes inside. I gave him a polite nod, trying to break the ice. He just kept staring, his eyes dull, almost dead. That night, I heard the first noise. It was around midnight, and I was lying in bed, trying to adjust to the silence of the new house. Then, from somewhere next door, I heard it. A heavy, dragging sound, like something big being pulled across the floor. My first thought was that Mr. Carter was moving furniture, but who does that in the middle of the night? I tried to ignore it, but the noise didn't stop. Thud, drag, thud, drag. The rhythm of it was unnerving, like some twisted metronome keeping time with my growing anxiety. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was lurking just out of sight, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an old man with poor sense of time, nothing more. The next morning, I found Mr. Carter standing in his yard again, staring at my house. His gaze locked onto mine as soon as I stepped outside, chill running down my spine. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just watched me, his eyes unblinking, following my every move. I tried to shake it off. That night, the noises came back. This time, they were louder, closer. And mixed with the dragging, I could swear I heard something else, something faint, like a muffled cry, quickly stifled. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the wall. The sounds were clearer now, and the more I listened, the more certain I became that something terrible was happening next door. But what could I do? Call the police and tell them I heard weird noises in the middle of the night? They'd laugh me off as some paranoid idiot. So, I did nothing. I lay awake for hours, listening to those horrible sounds, praying they would stop. They eventually did, but by then, sleep was impossible. The next day, Mr. Carter was in his yard again, watching me with those same dead eyes. I tried to ignore him, but every time I looked up, he was there, staring. And as I turned to go inside, he finally spoke. "Busy night?" he asked, his voice raspy like it hadn't been used in years. "What?" I stammered, caught off guard. "Didn't sleep much, did you?" "Heard you moving around," said, his lips curling into a crooked smile. Thin walls in these houses. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. How did he know I was awake? Was he listening to me while I listened to him? The thought made my skin crawl, but I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep. New house and all?" He nodded, still smiling that crooked smile, then turned and shuffled back into his house. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right with Mr. Carter, and I was starting to think I wasn't the only one who noticed. Over the next few days, the noises continued. Every night, like clockwork, I'd hear that same sickening thud and drag, thud and drag. Sometimes it was accompanied by those faint, muffled cries, so soft they could almost be mistaken for the wind if it wasn't for the sheer terror I felt every time they pierced the silence. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me in a strange new place. Deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with Mr. Carter. Something that twisted the very air around him, making it thick with a sense of dread, hung over my house like a dark cloud. It was around this time that I started noticing other things. Little details that only added to my unease. Like how Mr. Carter always took his trash out in the dead of night. Always in those large black bags that seemed unnervingly full. I never saw a garbage truck come by. Every morning, the bags were gone, as if they had disappeared into thin air. And the smell. God, that smell. It started off faint, just a whiff of something rotting on the breeze. Soon it grew stronger, seeping into my house, clinging to my clothes. Was the stench of decay, unmistakable and nauseating. And it was coming from Mr. Carter's house. One night, after hours of tossing and turning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on next door. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was about to open a door that should have stayed shut. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I waited until well past midnight, when the neighborhood was quiet and still. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I crept out of my house, keeping to the shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I kept going, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't control. Mr. Carter's house was dark, not a single light on. I hesitated on the porch, listening for any sign of movement inside. Nothing. Just the pounding of my heart in my ears. I reached out, my hand trembling, and tried the door. To my surprise, it swung open with a low creak. The stench hit me like a brick wall, overwhelming and putrid. I gagged, covering my mouth and nose, but forced myself to push on. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick and oppressive. I moved through the darkened rooms, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The whole place was strangely empty, devoid of the warmth or clutter you'd expect in someone's home. It felt more like a tomb. I found the basement door at the back of the kitchen, lightly ajar. A dim light flickered from below, casting long shadows up the stairs. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around and run. But I couldn't. I had to know what was down there. I descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood sending a spike of fear through my chest. When I reached the bottom, I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The basement was a nightmare. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Inside each jar floated something pale and grotesque, preserved in some kind of murky liquid. I couldn't make out what they were, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But my eyes were drawn to the far wall, where a large metal table stood, stained dark with what I could only hope was rust. On the table were photographs, hundreds of them, all laid out in neat rows. They were pictures of people from the neighborhood, taken without their knowledge. I recognized a few of them. Mrs. Collins from 3 houses down, the young couple who walked their dog every morning, even the mailman. And there, in the very center of the table, was a photo of me, taken through the window of my living room. My blood ran cold. I could barely breathe as I looked at that photo, my own eyes staring back at me with a look of utter ignorance, completely unaware of the evil that had been watching me. That's when I heard it, a soft creak from above, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps on the floorboards above me. Mr. Carter was home. But Mr. Carter was quicker than I expected. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron, and yanked me back. I twisted, trying to break free, but he was strong, much stronger than he looked. His eyes, those dead, hollow eyes, bore into mine with a look of pure malice. He said nothing, but his intentions were clear. He wasn't going to let me leave that basement alive. Panic surged through me, and I lashed out wildly, my fist connecting with his jaw. He grunted in pain but didn't let go. Instead, he twisted my arm, forcing me to my knees. I could feel the bones in my wrist grinding against each other, pain sharp and blinding. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed off the walls, but there was no one to hear it. No one who could help me. With a surge of adrenaline, I reached up with my free hand and grabbed one of the jars from the shelf. I didn't know what was inside it, and I didn't care. I smashed it against his head, the glass shattering on impact. He let out a guttural cry, stumbling backward, and I didn't wait to see the damage. I bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I threw the basement door open and ran out into the cold night air, the sound of Mr. Carter's enraged screams following me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that house. I didn't stop until I reached the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my entire body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I turned to look back at the house, expecting to see Mr. Carter chasing after me. The yard was empty. The house stood dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew what I had seen, but I had barely escaped from. And as I stood there, shivering in the cold, I realized that no matter how far I ran, I would never be able to escape the memory of that night. The memory of what was lurking in the darkness of Mr. Carter's basement. The police arrived quickly after my frantic 911 call, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the neighborhood. I stood on the curb, shivering, trying to explain what had happened between gasps of air. My words tumbled out in a panicked rush. How I'd heard the noises, how I'd found the basement, how Mr. Carter had tried to kill me. But as I spoke, I could see the skepticism in their eyes, the way they exchanged glances that spoke of doubt. They humored me. Now, 2 officers went inside while the others stayed with me, asking questions I could barely focus on. My thoughts were a whirl of terror and disbelief. What if they didn't find anything? What if Mr. Carter had hidden it all before they got there? Minutes ticked by like hours. I stared at the house, half expecting Mr. Carter to come bursting out, covered in blood, coming for me to finish what he'd started. Nothing happened. The house remained still, ominous in its silence. Finally, the officers returned, their faces grave. One of them approached me, his expression a mix of concern and doubt. "Sir, we didn't find anything down there," he said, his tone careful. "No jars, no photographs. Just an old basement filled with junk." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not possible. I saw it. It was all there. The photos. There was a photo of me. He's been watching me." The officer put a hand on my shoulder, trying to calm me down. "We did find Mr. Carter, though. He's in rough shape. But he's alive. He's claiming you attacked him out of nowhere. Says he has no idea what you're talking about." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "That's a lie. He was going to kill me." "We'll take him into custody, don't worry," the officer assured me. "But we're going to need you to come down to the station and give a full statement. We need to understand what happened here." I could see the disbelief written all over their faces. They didn't believe me. They thought I was some paranoid man who'd let his imagination get the best of him. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what Mr. Carter was capable of. The ride to the station was a blur. I was lost in my thoughts, replaying the events over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it all. How could everything have just disappeared? Had I imagined it? No, I knew that wasn't possible. I had felt the jars, seen the photos. The terror had been real. At the station, they took my statement, but the more I talked, the more I felt like I was digging myself into a hole. Every time I mentioned the jars, the photos, the tapes, they looked at me with that same patronizing doubt. They were polite, but I could tell they didn't believe a word of it. And the more I insisted, the crazier I sounded. Hours passed. I was finally allowed to go home, but the relief I felt was short-lived. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I realized I didn't want to go back to that house. Couldn't. Where else could I go? I had no family nearby, no friends to turn to. My fresh start had turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. When I got back, the house was dark and silent, just as I'd left it. The police had taped off Mr. Carter's property. There was no one around. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the place that had once felt like a safe haven. Now it was a prison, haunted by the horrors I'd uncovered. I forced myself inside, locking the door behind me and turning on every light in the house, but no amount of light could chase away the shadows that clung to me. I could still smell that awful stench, still feel Mr. Carter's cold, dead eyes on me. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every rustle of the wind sent me into a panic. I kept expecting to hear those familiar footsteps, see Mr. Carter standing at the foot of my bed, his face twisted with rage. But the night passed without incident, and morning came, bringing with it a false sense of security. I tried to convince myself it was over. Mr. Carter was gone, that I could move on. Deep down, I knew the truth. Police didn't find the jars. They didn't find the photos or the tapes, but that didn't mean they weren't real. Mr. A. Carter had hidden them, moved them before the police arrived. He was smart, too smart, and I knew he'd be back. Days passed, each one more torturous than the last. I barely left the house, too afraid of what might happen if I did. Phone rang constantly. Family, friends, even the police checking in on me. But I ignored them all. Couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't explain what I'd been through without sounding insane. And then one night, as I was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, I heard it. Soft creak. A footstep. Coming from the basement. My heart stopped. I had barricaded the basement door, convinced I'd never go down there again, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was down there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy flashlight, and crept toward the basement door. My hands shook as I reached for the barricade. slowly moving it aside. Every instinct told me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. I couldn't leave, not until I knew what was down there. The door creaked open and the smell hit me immediately. That same rotten stench, stronger than ever. I gagged but forced myself to keep going. Step by step, I descended into the darkness. Flashlight beam cutting through the thick, oppressive air. The bottom of the stairs, I froze. The basement was just as I'd left it, empty, save for the old furniture and boxes. But something was different. Something was wrong. I swept the flashlight across the room, my breath catching in my throat. And then, I saw it. In the corner, where the wardrobe had stood, was a single photograph, pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. I stepped closer, my hands trembling as I shone the light on it. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my house through the living room window. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized it was recent, taken that very night. I wasn't alone. Behind me, the basement door creaked shut. The door slammed shut with a heavy, resounding thud that echoed through the basement, leaving me in a suffocating darkness. My breath caught in my throat, the beam of the flashlight trembling in my hands as I spun around, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence pressing in on me from all sides. I was trapped in this place with the stench of decay filling my lungs and the photograph of me, of myself, staring back at me from the wall. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. How had someone gotten in? Had it been Mr. Carter somehow free? Or was there something else? Something worse that had been watching me all this time? Forced myself to move. Think. There had to be a way out. I couldn't let myself fall into the same panic that had gripped me before. I had to stay focused, had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But as I took a step forward, floorboards above me creaked. Long, deliberate sound, like someone shifting their weight. My heart pounded in my chest, my skin prickling with fear. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was in the house. Someone who knew I was down here, alone and vulnerable. I backed away, my eyes darting around the basement, searching for anything I could use to defend myself. The flashlight wasn't enough. It was heavy, sure, but I needed something more. My gaze fell on a rusted crowbar leaning against one of the shelves. I grabbed it, cold metal biting into my palm, and tightened my grip, ready for whatever was coming. Creaking stopped, placed by an eerie silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, that fills your head with all the things that could be lurking just out of sight. I knew I had to move, had to find a way out before whoever or whatever was up there decided to come down. I edged toward the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Each step felt like a lifetime. Every creak of the wood underfoot sending a spike of fear through me. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible breathing. It was coming from the other side of the door, just inches away from where I stood. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. I could feel the presence on the other side, the malevolent intent radiating through the door like a physical force. It was waiting for me, knowing I had nowhere else to go. I gripped the crowbar tighter, trying to summon the courage to act. But before I could make a move, the door began to creak open. My breath caught in my throat, my entire body trembling as the door slowly swung wide, revealing the darkened stairway beyond. At first I saw nothing, just the empty stairs leading up to the first floor. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow shift, figure stepping out of the darkness and into the dim light of the basement. It was Mr. Carter. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, with a manic gleam that sent a jolt of terror through me. His face was twisted into a grotesque grin, his lips stretched impossibly wide as if they were being pulled apart from the inside. He was holding something in his hand, something sharp and gleaming in the faint light. "You shouldn't have come back," he hissed, his voice a low, guttural whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "You should have stayed away. Now you're just like the others." I didn't think. I didn't have time to think. I swung the crowbar with all my strength, aiming for his head, but he was faster than I expected. He ducked, the crowbar whistling past him, and lunged at me with the knife. Pain exploded in my side as the blade sliced into my flesh, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I shoved him back with all my strength, the crowbar falling from my grasp as I pushed him toward the stairs. He staggered, didn't fall. Instead, he laughed, a horrible, rasping sound that echoed through the basement, making my blood run cold. He came at me again, the knife gleaming as he raised it high, ready to strike, but I wasn't going to give him the chance. In a last, desperate move, I grabbed the only thing within reach, the photograph pinned to the wall. I ripped it down, holding it out in front of me like a shield. The sight of it seemed to stop him in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the image of me. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" For a moment, he said nothing. He just stood there, his grin fading, his eyes locked on the photograph. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife, his expression changing from manic glee to something darker, something almost regretful. "It's not about what I want," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's about what they want. And they want you." Before I could react, he turned and bolted up the stairs, disappearing into the darkness. I was left standing there, the photograph crumpled in my hand, blood seeping through my shirt where the knife had cut me. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of his words, of what had just happened, but there was no time to think. I had to get out. I had to escape before he came back, before they came for me. I stumbled up the stairs, every step a painful effort, my vision blurring from the blood loss. The house was dark and silent, the air thick with that same rotten stench. I could feel it closing in around me, the shadows pressing against my skin, suffocating me. I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock, my hands slick with blood. Finally, the door swung open, and I stumbled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at the house, expecting to see Mr. Carter, or worse, emerging from the darkness. But the house remained silent, still, like a predator waiting in the shadows for its next victim. I didn't go back. I couldn't. I left everything behind, the house, my belongings, my old life. I disappeared, moved far away to a place where no one knew me. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the memory of that night. The photograph, the jars, the knife, all of it haunted my dreams, turning them into endless nightmares. And then, one day, a package arrived at my new address. No return label, no indication of where it had come from. Just a plain brown box, sitting on my doorstep like a ticking time bomb. I knew, even before I opened it, what would be inside. And when I pulled off the tape and opened the flaps, I wasn't surprised to see the photograph, my photograph, staring back at me, the edges stained with something dark and sticky. Beneath it, nestled in the box, was the knife. The blade still gleamed, sharp and ready. I dropped the box, my hands trembling. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, closing in around me, the air growing thick with that same familiar stench. I could hear it now. The faint creak of footsteps, the whisper of breath just behind me. They had found me. There's something strange about the new family that moved in next door. I first saw them on a bright Saturday morning, standing by the curb as a moving truck backed into the driveway of the old Peterson house. It was a couple and their teenage daughter, and they seemed off. There was an unnatural stillness about them, like they were playing a part in a show they didn't want to be in. I watched from my kitchen window, pretending to clean dishes while I observed them with growing curiosity. It wasn't just me either. The entire neighborhood seemed to share this silent unease. It wasn't unusual for people to talk and greet each other, but these new folks kept to themselves, heads bowed and eyes averted. They hardly spoke a word as they unloaded their things. No laughter, no shouts of instruction, just the sound of boxes being shuffled and furniture being moved. As if choreographed, they worked in perfect, eerie silence. The husband had an unremarkable presence, the kind of man you'd forget the moment you looked away, while the wife had this perpetually anxious look on her face, eyes darting around like a caged animal. Their daughter was perhaps the strangest of all. She lingered behind, her long black hair obscuring her face as she clutched a tattered doll, watching with a fixed gaze that seemed to bore into the ground beneath her feet. The neighborhood has always been a sanctuary, a safe haven where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever happened. But this new family, They felt like an intrusion, blight on the harmonious fabric we had grown so comfortable with. And though they never did anything explicitly wrong, there was this underlying current of wrongness about them that I couldn't shake off. Days passed, and the unease only grew. At night, the house stood dark, as if no one lived there, but I knew better. I heard noises, strange, unsettling noises, like whispers carried by the wind, or footsteps pacing back and forth, echoing in the stillness of the night. I often found myself staring out the window into their backyard, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything that would justify my growing paranoia. Then, one evening, as the sky darkened and shadows stretched across the street, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The daughter stood in the front yard, her silhouette etched against the dim glow of the streetlights. She was staring straight at my house, her face obscured by her hair. She seemed to be whispering something, her lips moving in rapid succession, but no sound reached me. I felt a chill run down my spine, primal fear taking hold of me as I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I tried to shake it off, convince myself it was all in my head, but the feeling lingered, a constant, oppressive weight pressing down on me. There was something wrong with them, something dark and malevolent lurking beneath their outwardly mundane facade. And whatever it was, I had the unsettling sense that it was watching me too. It wasn't long before the rumors started spreading. Neighbors whispered about their past, questioning where they had come from and why they were so secretive. But no one knew anything concrete. It was as if they had appeared out of thin air, materializing in our neighborhood like ghosts haunting a forgotten past. Despite the growing chatter, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like a prey caught in the sights of a predator. I began to see things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows flitting across my walls, shapes moving just beyond the edge of my vision. And always, there was that sense of wrongness, as if reality itself was bending around them, warping into something twisted and unrecognizable. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the window once more. The street was deserted, silent, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. But as I peered through the darkness, I saw her again. Girl from next door. She stood there, motionless, her eyes fixed on my house, her mouth moving in silent incantation. This time, I was sure of it. She was saying something, repeating it over and over again like a chant. A warning, perhaps, or a curse. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away, closing the curtains in a futile attempt to block out the sight. But it was too late. The image of her pale, ghostly face was seared into my mind, an indelible mark that would haunt me long after the night had passed. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something terribly wrong with my new neighbors, and I was determined to find out what it was, even if it meant confronting the darkness lurking just beyond the threshold of my once peaceful existence. Life in our quiet neighborhood began to unravel when the disappearances started. It began innocuously enough, little things that seemed mundane on their own, but as each day passed, the string of missing objects and pets grew into something impossible to ignore. First to vanish was Mr. Andrews' cat, Whiskers. It was the kind of cat that everyone knew, fat and lazy, always lounging in the sun and greeting passers-by with a lazy yawn. The neighborhood kids loved him, and his absence was immediately noticed. At first, we all thought he'd simply wandered off, but as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Whiskers was gone for good. The rumors started again. Neighbors whispered about a wild animal lurking around, or perhaps a coyote that had found its way into our peaceful suburb. But in my gut, I felt it was something else. Something closer to home. The unease that had settled over us since the new family moved in now seemed to take a more sinister shape. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow involved. Late one night, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps shuffling outside my window. My heart jumped into my throat as I crept toward the curtains, peering out into the darkness. There, in the dim light, I saw the teenage girl from next door wandering the street. She moved with a slow, deliberate pace, her arms wrapped tightly around her body, as if warding off an unseen chill. Her eyes, wide and hollow, scanned the area as if searching for something, or someone. For a moment she stopped and looked directly at my window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Even in the darkness, her gaze felt sharp and penetrating, as if she could see right through me. Then, just as suddenly, she turned and disappeared into the night, figure swallowed by the shadows. I wanted to believe she was just a troubled kid, that perhaps she was just out for a walk, but something about the encounter felt wrong. It was the way she moved, like she was gliding over the pavement, feet barely touching the ground. And those eyes? They were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, sadness, perhaps even a plea for help. That night, sleep eluded me, my mind plagued by questions and a growing sense of dread. Why was she out there? What was she looking for? And most importantly, what was she trying to tell me? The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I found a small note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a scrap of paper, hastily torn and scrawled with a single word, "Help." I stood there, holding the note in my trembling hands, my mind racing. It had to be from her, the girl. But what did it mean? Was she reaching out to me, or was it some kind of twisted prank meant to unsettle me further? Determined to find answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I would confront the new family, ask them about the disappearances, and find out what they knew. Life in our quiet neighborhood began to unravel when the disappearances started. It began innocuously enough, little things that seemed mundane on their own. But as each day passed, the string of missing objects and pets grew into something impossible to ignore. The first to vanish was Mr. Andrews' cat, Whiskers. It was the kind of cat that everyone knew, fat and lazy, always lounging in the sun and greeting passersby with a lazy yawn. The neighborhood kids loved him, and his absence was immediately noticed. First, we all thought he'd simply wandered off. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Whiskers was gone for good. The rumors started again. Neighbors whispered about a wild animal lurking around, or perhaps a coyote that had found its way into our peaceful suburb. But in my gut, I felt it was something else, something closer to home. The unease that had settled over us since the new family moved in now seemed to take a more sinister shape. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow involved. Late one night, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps shuffling outside my window. My heart jumped into my throat as I crept toward the curtain, peering out into the darkness. There, in the dim light, I saw the teenage girl from next door, wandering the street. She moved with a slow, deliberate pace, her arms wrapped tightly around her body as if warding off an unseen chill. Her eyes, wide and hollow, scanned the area as if searching for something, or someone. For a moment, she stopped and looked directly at my window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Even in the darkness, her gaze felt sharp and penetrating, as if she could see right through me. Then, just as suddenly, she turned and disappeared into the night, figure swallowed by the shadows. I wanted to believe she was just a troubled kid, that perhaps she was just out for a walk. But something about the encounter felt wrong. It was the way she moved, like she was gliding over the pavement, her feet barely touching the ground. And those eyes, they were filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, sadness, perhaps even a plea for help. That night, sleep eluded me, my mind plagued by questions and a growing sense of dread. Why was she out there? What was she looking for? And most importantly, what was she trying to tell me? The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I found a small note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a scrap of paper, hastily torn and scrawled with a single word, "Help." I stood there, holding the note in my trembling hands, my mind racing. It had to be from her, the girl, but what did it mean? Was she reaching out to me, or was it some kind of twisted prank meant to unsettle me further? Determined to find answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I would confront the new family, ask them about the disappearances, and find out what they knew. That afternoon, I knocked on their door, my heart pounding with every passing second. The wife answered, her face pale and drawn, eyes darting nervously as she greeted me. I tried to mask my unease, forcing a smile as I introduced myself. "Hi, I'm from next door," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I was just wondering if you've seen my cat, or maybe heard anything about the missing pets in the neighborhood." She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the hallway behind her. "No, I'm sorry. We haven't seen or heard anything. We've been busy settling in." Her answer felt rehearsed, a carefully crafted lie meant to deflect suspicion. But before I could press further, the teenage girl appeared behind her mother, her eyes wide and filled with that same unsettling fear I'd seen before. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I asked, directing my question to the girl, hoping to coax out whatever secrets she held. But before she could answer, the husband appeared, a looming presence that filled the doorway with an air of silent authority. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "If you have questions, take them to the police." With that, he gently closed the door, leaving me standing on their doorstep with a growing sense of frustration and fear. It was clear they were hiding something, but without proof, I had no choice but to walk away. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows crept in, I heard a soft tapping at my door. It was the girl, her eyes wide with desperation, a silent plea written across her face. Before I could speak, she thrust a small, worn-out diary into my hands, her voice a trembling whisper. "Read it," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being caught. "But be careful. They're always watching." With that, she turned and ran back into the night, leaving me with a mix of curiosity and dread. As I flipped open the diary, pages filled with haunting sketches and cryptic messages that promised to unravel the truth behind my eerie new neighbors. I sat in my dimly lit living room, clutching the diary the girl had given me, its frayed cover, testament to the secrets it contained. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the first page, the yellowed paper whispering of age and mystery. Each line seemed to pulse with hidden meanings, the ink a stark contrast against the faded background. The first entries were ordinary enough. Musings of a teenage girl adjusting to a new home, notes about school, friends, and other trivial matters. But as I read on, the tone shifted. Her writing became more frantic, the words spilling onto the page in hurried scrawls that betrayed an increasing sense of desperation and fear. April 5th, we moved again. Another new house, another new beginning, they said. But this place feels different. There's something off about it. The shadows here seem to move on their own, whispering secrets I can't quite hear. I've tried telling Mom and Dad, but they just brush it off. I wish they would listen. April 12th, the shadows are watching. They creep into my dreams, haunting me with images I can't shake off. I hear footsteps at night, soft and deliberate, as if someone's walking through the halls, even though we're all in bed. I don't feel safe here. April 25th. It happened again last night. I woke up to find my window open, the curtains billowing in the cold breeze. My room was filled with the scent of earth and decay. I swear I heard someone whisper my name, a voice so chilling it made my skin crawl. Can't sleep anymore, not knowing if they're going to come back. May 2nd, Mom and Dad are acting strange. They're always whispering to each other, casting worried glances in my direction. I caught them arguing in the kitchen last night, something about keeping me safe. From what? They won't tell me. I'm scared. I feel like I'm losing my mind. The entries grew more fragmented, filled with desperate attempts to make sense of the strange occurrences that plagued their new home. It was clear that the girl was terrified, caught in a web of mystery and fear she couldn't untangle. And then I found a drawing that made my heart skip a beat. It was a crude sketch of the neighborhood. Our houses lined up in a neat row. But there in the margins were symbols I didn't recognize, cryptic runes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They were interspersed with the outline of figures, lurking in the shadows, watching from afar. As I traced my fingers over the page, chill ran down my spine. It felt as if the diary was speaking directly to me, warning me of something far more sinister than I'd imagined. The more I read, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. The girl had detailed the disappearances in our neighborhood, objects, pets, and even people, who seemed to vanish without a trace. She wrote about hearing whispers, seeing shadows move of their own accord, and feeling the presence of something evil lurking just beyond her sight. May 15th, I saw it again last night, standing in the corner of my room. It was just a shadow at first, but then it moved closer, its eyes glowing in the darkness like embers. I couldn't move, didn't scream. It just stood there, watching me, feeding off my fear. I have to find out what it wants before it's too late. The diary hinted at a malevolent force, something ancient and powerful that had taken hold of the neighborhood. The girl seemed to believe that her family was somehow connected to it. Their arrival had stirred this dark presence from its slumber. As I flipped through the pages, I found more sketches, portraits of twisted figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. They seemed almost alive, as if they could leap from the pages and into my world. The drawings were accompanied by strange symbols, similar to those I'd seen earlier, etched with meticulous precision. I couldn't shake the feeling that the girl had uncovered something horrifying. Something that explained the strange behavior of her family and the eerie occurrences that plagued our once peaceful street. But just as I was about to close the diary, I stumbled upon a final entry, scrawled in a shaky hand. June 1st, I'm running out of time. The whispers are louder now, and the shadows are closing in. I don't know if I can trust my own family anymore. They're hiding something from me, something terrible. If you find this, please know that I tried to stop it. They're always watching. Always. The entry ended abruptly. The ink smeared as if she'd been interrupted mid-sentence. A sense of urgency and fear was palpable, leaving me with a gnawing sense of dread that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I closed the diary, my thoughts a tangled web of confusion and fear. I had to do something. The girl was in danger, and so was I. But how could I fight something I didn't understand? Something that lurked in the shadows, biding its time, waiting to strike. With the diary clutched in my hands, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The girl had entrusted me with her secrets, and it was up to me to unravel the mystery and stop whatever darkness had taken hold of our neighborhood before it was too late. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenges ahead. The shadows were watching, and I had no choice but to confront them, face the horrors that lay hidden in the depths of the night. The time had come to uncover the truth about my neighbors and the malevolent force that threatened to consume us all. The diary had become my constant companion, a haunting presence that whispered of dark secrets and hidden truths. I carried it with me everywhere, its weight a constant reminder of the girl's plea for help and the terrible mystery that had engulfed our neighborhood. I spent every spare moment poring over its pages, trying to decipher the cryptic symbols and make sense of the girl's unsettling drawings. I even took to the internet, scouring forums and obscure websites for any clue about what they might mean. Every night, as the shadows stretched across my room, I'd find myself drawn back to the diary, its pages filled with a morbid curiosity that both fascinated and terrified me. The drawings were the worst. Those grotesque figures with their elongated limbs and hollow eyes haunted my dreams, taunting me with their silent malevolence. It felt as if they were watching me, waiting for the moment to crawl out from the pages and drag me into their dark world. Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind, I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was happening to our neighborhood, and more importantly, what role the mysterious family played in it all. One evening, as the sky bled into a deep, unsettling twilight, I sat by the window, the diary open on my lap, when I noticed something odd. Across the street, the new family's house was eerily quiet. No lights, no sounds, nothing. Just a yawning emptiness that seemed to echo through the growing darkness. It was unlike them. Usually there was a faint glow from the windows, a murmur of life that assured me they were still there. But tonight, there was nothing. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Compelled by an urge I couldn't quite explain, I decided to investigate. The night air was cold and still as I made my way across the street, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. When I reached their front door, I hesitated, the fear clawing at my insides. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I had to push forward. I took a deep breath and knocked softly, the sound echoing through the quiet night. There was no answer, only the oppressive silence that seemed to envelop the house. I knocked again, louder this time, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. Still, there was no response. It was as if the house was empty, devoid of any life. A part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my own home and forget about the strange family and their secret. But something kept me there, a gnawing feeling that this was my only chance to uncover the truth. I tried the door and, to my surprise, swung open with a creak, revealing the darkened interior beyond. The house was shrouded in shadows, faint moonlight casting eerie patterns across the floor. With a deep breath, I stepped inside, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. The faint scent of decay lingered, curling through the darkness like a specter. The living room was empty, save for a few scattered papers and overturned furniture. It looked as if there had been a struggle, the remnants of a hasty departure. My pulse quickened as I moved deeper into the house, the silence broken only by the sound of my footsteps on the creaking floorboards. I explored each room, finding nothing but more signs of chaos and abandonment. There were scattered belongings, broken glass, and a creeping sense of foreboding that seemed to grow with every step I took. Then I reached the basement door. It loomed before me, a dark portal leading into the unknown. Something about it felt wrong, a palpable sense of dread that sent shivers down my spine. But I had to know. The truth was down there, waiting for me to uncover it. With a trembling hand, I opened the door, creak echoing through the empty house. The air that wafted up from below was cold and damp, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking ominously beneath my weight. The basement was pitch black, an abyss that seemed to swallow the light from above. I fumbled for a switch, finally finding one and flooding the space with a dim, flickering glow. What I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols, the same ones from the girl's diary, etched into the concrete with an almost ritualistic precision. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, a sense of malevolence that seemed to seep into my very bones. In the center of the room lay a circle of candles, their flames flickering eerily, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. Within the circle, a small altar had been set up, draped in dark cloth and adorned with bizarre objects. Bones, feathers, and what looked like pieces of rotting meat. The sight was both surreal and horrifying, a twisted tableau that defied logic and reason. It was as if I had stumbled upon some dark ritual, forbidden practice that had no place in our world. As I stood there, frozen with terror, I heard a faint rustling from the shadows. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat as I searched for the source of the noise. There, in the corner, something moved. Figure hunched over, shrouded in darkness. I took a hesitant step forward, squinting through the dim light, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. The figure remained still, its form indistinct, almost blending into the shadows. And then, as if sensing my presence, it turned toward me, revealing a face twisted in anguish and fear. It was the girl, her eyes wide and hollow, filled with a desperation that mirrored the words in her diary. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my own racing heart. "They're coming. They know you're here." Before I could respond, a door slammed shut somewhere above us, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. Girl flinched, her eyes darting to the stairs with a look of pure terror. "They're here," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "We have to go, now." Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. The family hadn't left. They were still here, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. The sense of being hunted was palpable, a chilling certainty that sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. Without another word, the girl grabbed my hand, pulling me toward a hidden exit at the back of the basement. We stumbled through the darkness, the air thick with tension and fear, as we fled from the ominous presence that seemed to close in around us. As we emerged into the night, I stole a glance back at the house, its dark silhouette looming against the sky. The windows seemed to glower down at us, filled with a silent malevolence that promised retribution. There was no time to think, no time to dwell on the horrors we'd uncovered. We had to escape, to warn the others, to unravel the truth before it was too late. The girl's hand was cold in mine, her grip a desperate lifeline as we ran through the shadows, the night closing in around us. Whatever secrets lay within that house, whatever dark forces the family had unleashed, they were far from over. The diary had been just the beginning, a glimpse into a world of darkness that threatened to consume us all. And as we fled into the night, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a nightmare that had no end. The night swallowed us as we ran, our footsteps echoing in the silence like frantic heartbeats. My lungs burned with every breath, and the cold air bit at my skin, but I didn't dare slow down. The girl's grip on my hand was unyielding, fear palpable, driving us forward into the unknown. We slipped through the backyards, ducking beneath low-hanging branches and tripping over tangled roots. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent jolts of panic through me, a reminder that we were not alone. Somewhere behind us, family lurked, their intentions a dark shadow that loomed ever closer. The girl led me to an abandoned shed at the edge of the neighborhood, its walls leaning precariously, as if they might collapse at any moment. We huddled inside, gasping for air, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and terror. She looked at me, her eyes wide and haunted, as if she were about to reveal a truth too terrible to comprehend. "They're part of something much bigger," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "A cult. They believe in things that shouldn't exist. They think they can bring something back." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications that made my skin crawl. Cult, dark rituals, forbidden practices that delved into realms best left undisturbed. It was madness, and yet everything I'd seen told me it was horribly real. The diary, the symbols, the eerie presence that clung to the house like a malevolent fog. It all fit together in a sickening tapestry of horror that threatened to unravel my sanity. "Why me?" I asked, my voice a trembling whisper. "Why are they after me?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor as if the truth itself was too painful to share. "Because you know," she finally said, her voice tinged with resignation. "You've seen too much. They can't let you leave. They want to make sure you never tell anyone." The reality of her words settled over me like a suffocating weight. I had become entangled in a nightmare that defied reason, a web of darkness spun by those who worshipped things that should never see the light of day. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this twisted horror. There had to be something we could do, some way to escape the clutches of the cult that had ensnared us. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the shed, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent chills down my spine. They were close, far too close. The sense of being hunted was suffocating, the inevitability of our capture closing in around us like a vice. The girl's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to get out of here," she said urgently. "There's another way, through the old tunnels beneath the neighborhood. They don't know about it. It's our only chance." With no time to lose, we scrambled from the shed, darkness pressing in around us as we moved with stealth and desperation. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat as we navigated through the night, guided by the girl's knowledge of the hidden paths that wound beneath our feet. The entrance to the tunnels was concealed by overgrown brush, a nondescript hole in the ground that promised sanctuary from the nightmare above. We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and more oppressive with every step. Tunnels stretched before us like a labyrinth of forgotten secrets, twisting and turning through the earth in a disorienting maze. I kept close to the girl, her presence a fragile beacon in the suffocating blackness. As we moved deeper into the bowels of the earth, the distant sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The walls were etched with the same symbols I'd seen in the diary, their sinister patterns glowing faintly in the dim light of our flashlight. Every turn felt like a plunge into madness, claustrophobic tunnels threatening to swallow us whole. My mind played tricks on me, whispers and shadows lurking at the edges of my vision, threatening to drag me into an abyss of despair. But we pressed on, driven by a desperate hope. Somewhere, somehow, we would find a way out of this nightmare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small, hidden clearing on the outskirts of the neighborhood. First light of dawn tinged the sky with a fragile hope, casting away the shadows that had pursued us through the night. The girl and I stood there, panting and exhausted, our clothes torn and dirty, but alive. The sense of freedom was intoxicating, a heady relief that washed over us as we realized we had escaped the clutches of the dark forces that had haunted us. But the danger was far from over. Cult was still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching and waiting for the moment to strike again. I knew that as long as they existed, no one in our neighborhood or anywhere, be truly safe. Girl looked at me, eyes filled with quiet resolve. We have to stop them, she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that still lingered in her gaze. We have to make sure they can never hurt anyone again. I nodded, the weight of our shared burden settling over me like a heavy cloak. We had uncovered a truth that should never have seen the light of day. Darkness that threatened to consume everything it touched. Together, we made our way back to the neighborhood, determined to expose the cult and bring an end to their sinister machinations. The road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but I knew we had to try. As we reached the edge of the neighborhood, I glanced back at the house that had been the epicenter of our nightmare. It stood silent and foreboding, monument to the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of our world. But now, with the dawn breaking, there was a glimmer of hope. We had survived the night, and with the knowledge we had gained, we were prepared to fight back against the horrors that had threatened to consume us. With renewed determination, we set out to unravel the web of secrets surrounded the cult, our resolve stronger than ever. We were no longer just victims of a dark and twisted game. We were warriors, determined to bring the truth to light and banish the shadows that sought to engulf us. The nightmare was far from over, but we had taken the first step toward reclaiming our lives and breaking free from the chains of fear that had bound us. And as the first rays of sunlight pierced the gloom, I knew one thing for certain. The darkness would not prevail, not as long as we had the courage to stand against it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up to keep the terror coming. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring even more spine-tingling content your way. Before you go, don't forget to check out the video playing on the screen. It's packed with more unsettling tales and eerie experiences that you won't want to miss. If you have any frightening stories of your own or suggestions for future content, drop them in the comments below. Stay tuned for more haunting adventures. Until next time, sleep tight, decant.